Hello, good evening everyone. So we're going to continue with the notes from my microbiology class. I am going to have an exam on Tuesday, so we're going to keep on with the next chapter of that exam. It's going to be the vaccines or the application of immunology. So some history of vaccines in China in the year 1000, they had this process called variolation, variolation, variolation. In the Chinese writings around that year of 1000 AD would involve the movement of scabs from smallpox lesions, and then these would be intentionally placed onto the skin or inhaled. This would create a mild disease, and then from this, there would be immunity in that patient. Again, variolation will be taking place in China, as well as India, around 1000 AD. This is when you take, again, a sample of scabs of a smallpox victim, or lesion of the smallpox. And you're going to inoculate someone with this intentionally. And then when that happens, you get a mild disease. But afterwards, you get immunity. Hopefully, the body was able to react well to the smallpox inoculation. However, there were some occasional events where the person was fatal or they're contagious. So again, there's some risk involved in this very early vaccination of variolation that we saw in the years around 1000 AD. Right, next on our roadmap we have Turkey. And Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, the wife of the British ambassador to Turkey, had her children immunized. This would take place around 1721. So 700 years later, we have this next development. And this time, we are going to have, again, the exposure, the intent to expose to smallpox. And now, the dangers and the costs. Many people remain unprotected, even though we saw this effort to immunize the public and immunize children. There is still a high cost and as well as risk. So it hasn't been perfected yet at this point in history, in 1721. We go a little bit further, and variolation, that was around hundreds and thousands of years ago in 1000 AD. Now we have the term vaccination from Louis Pasteur. He is the one that's credited with giving the name vaccination to this process. We have someone named Edward Jenner, and he notices that maids who had the cowpox disease rarely got smallpox. Let me put the word rarely there. And so he was thinking to himself, let's try and expose someone to cowpox. So he would expose a farm boy in this experiment, James Phipps, to material from a cowpox lesion. So in 1796, he inoculates someone with cowpox. And then 6 weeks later, he would expose the same patient, James Phipps, to smallpox. And then after this, Jenner found that he was immune. He was able to use this similar pathogen, and now his body knew how to fight the very similar smallpox. And therefore, Jenner and others worked to spread variolation using the less dangerous material. This would keep going on until 1977, where this is the last case of smallpox. Okay, so now, since we know all that history, let's talk about terms that are relevant to vaccination, such as immunization. Immunization is when you're inducing immunity. We are calling immunization the largest impact on human health. And this is when we're using knowledge to fight disease. We're going to be also using immunological reactions in diagnostics. An example of this would be the lateral flow test, which is used to detect different strains of flu or even COVID for that matter. And you're using a specific set of antibodies. And that's why that line is there. You usually have a control and then you have a positive or a negative. And depending on the specificity of the antibodies, if they're able to detect an antigen specific to that pathogen, then that line on that lateral flow test would appear due to the specificity with the antibodies. We have active immunity, where you're going to get exposed to an antigen. This is right after you're exposed to an antigen. And you're going to also make your own antibodies. That's an important differentiation there to our different types of immunity when we're talking here. So we have natural active, and also we have artificial active. So natural active is when you're going to have just a regular exposure to disease. However, our artificial active immunity will kick in after we get a vaccination. It's artificial again because we're using a man-made means to create that immune response in active immunity. Okay, so now we could also talk about passive immunity. Passive immunity is when you're having that response, or you're going to acquire immunity by attaining antibodies from another source, not your own antibodies like up here. With active, it's your own antibodies, but passive is the reaction by obtaining antibodies from another source. guess what? We have both natural and artificial in this sense as well. Natural passive and immune response would be something like the transfer of antibodies from the mom to the fetus during that critical time when you're having development. And during pregnancy, the mother's IgG antibodies will cross the placenta. Once again, this is in that very important developmental stage. We also have it occurring during breastfeeding, where the IgA of the mom would be present and it would be transferred to the baby. There's no memory, unfortunately, in passive natural immunity. And the protection is lost once the antibodies degrade. So once the breastfeeding concludes, after a short time, unfortunately, there isn't a memory of the immune system from passive natural, and it's also short term. Okay, so now let's talk about artificial passive. This still means we're going to be getting antibodies from another source, but in the artificial sense, we're going to get the injection of anti-serum. Now, anti-serum, when we inject someone with anti-serum, we could prevent disease before or after likely exposure. And the anti-serum will have antibodies, of course. We also have antitoxins. An antitoxin is just an anti-serum that protects against a toxin. We're going to then transfer the serum into a recipient. An example of an anti-serum would be a treatment for Ebola. And then antitoxins, again, we have a ton of those for even venom and all that. Right. We could also talk about the hyperimmune globulin. And when we refer to this globulin, this is an antibody to a specific disease. This is an antibody that is specific to a certain disease. We're also going to have something called the immune globulin. Just a regular one, not a hyperimmune one, but just immune globulin. And here this is going to be an IgG, and this is going to either come from humans or animals. We have monoclonal, such as Regeneron. Then we also have, again, this could come from horses because horses have a lot of blood, or they could be sourced from another human. I'm going to just write that down before I forget. And Regeneron hasn't been approved ineffective for Omicron. I think that's a typo on the professor's slide in class. He said it wasn't so far used for Omicron, so I think that's just a typo there. But let's go on to the next portion of this. Okay, now let's talk about herd immunity. This was one of the big things everyone was talking about during COVID. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the part where everyone was vaccinated in high enough numbers during the middle of the pandemic, but now since we're in the tail end, that the emergency alert and all that has been gone for it. It's still around, so we need to still be vigilant, but then we have a lot of herd immunity now. So what is herd immunity? Herd immunity is when the critical portion of the population has immunized. Enough people have gotten the vaccine or gotten an anti-serum, any of those things, that the infectious agent has less outlets to infect. Also known as the host. There are less sufficient hosts that are susceptible to the pathogen, so therefore there are less hosts for it to actually infect. Okay, so herd immunity is responsible for declines in childhood diseases, however, we could have diseases reappear if the vaccination rates fall. Because again, once those vaccination rates fall, once people aren't taking the anti-serums and whatnot, doing all those immunization opportunities, then that will leave more outlets and hosts that are susceptible to the pathogen. Effective vaccines should be safe. They should be long-term, of course. So these should be long-term. So want them to be stable. We saw during COVID where we needed to freeze the mRNA vaccine, and unfortunately a lot of areas in the globe did not have access to such cold temperatures in order to do that. So we need to make sure that the vaccine is long-lasting, it's cost-effective, it's stable, and it's easy to access and administer. For an ideal vaccine. Okay, now, is herd immunity possible with COVID-19? This is kind of an aside. The vaccines are going to be used a lot in Western countries as of April 4, 2023. We have this chart here that the professor showed us, and the US, a lot of South America, China, a lot of Western Europe, Russia even has a high amount, around 70 to 90% of the people there have been the vaccine. There's uneven rollout, however, like unfortunately in Africa, some parts of Mexico, a lot of these Saharan areas in Africa, unfortunately, we need to provide them with this vaccine and hopefully bolster the medicine opportunities in those countries, work with people there in the communities. New variants will change the equation, like the vaccine is mRNA, but then we are only targeting specific parts of the virus that are changing these mutants and variants, because again, we're not proofreading with an mRNA virus. And so these new mutants and variants are going to change how effective the vaccine is. Unless we could specifically target one of those conserved regions of the virus particle, then we will only just be chasing variants over and over and over, like the flu virus. Immunity is not forever. We saw the antibodies do degrade, and the vaccines may again artificially select for those variants unintentionally. Alright, let's talk about the definition of a vaccine before we get too carried away here. A vaccine is a prepared sample of the pathogen or its products. and this is going to induce active immunity. Remember, that's going to be our own antibodies. Sometimes a vaccine will have something called an adjuvant, and this is just going to be something in the solution that increases the immune response to antigens. So this is a substance that will really increase that potency and the response of the antibodies to this antigen. Some of them do have adjuvants, some of them do not. Then this next table is just a ton of types of vaccines to prevent bacterial as well as viral. So on the bacterial side, I'm just going to list a few of them. I listed many of them in my actual notes, but we have anthrax. And another thing we have is for TB, diphtheria. There's also one for diphtheria. And then these all have different types of vaccines. The anthrax one is a subunit. This is a toxoid one for diphtheria because there's diphtheria that creates a toxin. And then TB, this is going to be attenuated, aka a live pathogen in the TB one. We're going to just go into detail with all those different categories of vaccines in a bit, but then we also have ones, of course, for viral diseases. We saw COVID, but let's also talk about Hep B. This is a recombinant. Polio, this was a very important one. And we're going to have two forms. We have the regular, vaccine one, and then that's going to be inactivated, and then the oral one is going to be attenuated. The rabies vaccine is inactivated, and then shingles is attenuated. And of course we have the COVID one, which is an RNA virus. Depending on the maker of the vaccine you get for COVID, it could be an mRNA vaccine, or it's going to have the parts of the actual viral particle in there. Alright, so let's go and talk about the attenuated vaccine. Let me go and find it. There we go. Whole pathogen vaccines. I forgot to put that in my notes. That's their actual big category. Okay, whole pathogen vaccines. The first one is the attenuated. Again, this means the live pathogen. This is going to be a long-lasting vaccine, and its effect, there's going to be more response by the immune system when there's an attenuated vaccine. Let me go to the next page here. Sorry about that. The single dose, again, it's long-lasting. The microbe will multiply in the body. Because of that, there would be more response to the immune system. And however, there is a con at play here. The con is very dastardly, in my opinion. The avirulent pathogen in here, the live pathogen, could revert, and then now it causes disease. Or we could also cause disease in the immune suppress. Unfortunately, some people do just happen to have a weak immune system, and then if we use an attenuated vaccine, there's a higher risk of them getting the disease. That's just a risk, so it's not set in stone. It's a con. It says could, that's a risk. So again, there's always risks involved in life, and a lot of the risks here with vaccines aren't as large as the benefits, as we're going to keep going on here. The benefits outweigh the risks in a lot of these. All right, we also have the inactivated vaccine. The inactivated vaccine will have a killed real strain. I should mention that attenuated examples include the one for measles or MMR, while an example for inactivated would be polio. The first one, the shot one. Okay, so pros, this is the actual pathogen. This is now going to be a specific and correct immune response. It can't revert since it's been killed. Remember, we had that problem with the attenuated where the living pathogen has not been killed, so therefore it could revert and cause disease, or it could multiply. However, in activated, we don't have that problem. A con with the inactivated would be no replication, so this is short term. And we also need an adjuvant, again, to increase that potency. Alright, now let's talk about the viral vaccines. We are going to have two types here. We're going to have the replicating and then the non-replicating. So in replicating, we're going to be using an adenovirus. We'll carry the antigen genes. And this, unfortunately, is an efficient way to deliver the genetic material, but we might be suppressed by the host immune response. Okay, so one of the examples of the replicating viral vaccine would be bird flu. In non-replicating, we're going to, of course, as the name suggests, the carrier virus can infect the human cells, but it can't replicate, as the name suggests. And again, this is efficient, and it may be suppressed, so it's kind of just the same otherwise, other than this adenovirus cannot copy. Examples of the non-replicating would be the famous Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. As the professor in my class put it, it's the famous J&J one. Don't have much else to say there, but oh well, I got Pfizer and Moderna. Okay, so now let's talk about subunit vaccines. These are pretty interesting. These are getting to more niche categories of types of vaccines. I've never heard of these, actually. I've only known about mRNA and then the attenuated and then the inactivated. I never knew about subunit ones. Okay, so subunit vaccines are going to have key proteins or antigenic fragments such as polysaccharides. There's our two subcategories. Proteins are antigenic fragments such as polysaccharides from pathogens. And there aren't going to be any cell parts. So this means there's going to be an extremely low risk of side effects. And an example would be the acellular pertussis vaccine. Alright, the protein subunit version of the subunit. Yeah, the protein version of the subunit vaccine. Sorry, I fumbled the words there. Would be an example is the Zika vaccine candidate. We're going to have pure viral antigens. And we're going to need a delivery system here, because we don't want to be degraded. There's a pro, however, of no infection. And again, no cell parts. Alright, polysaccharide conjugate. The conjugate subunit vaccine as an interesting setup. We're going to have the surface polysaccharide from the bacteria plus a protein. This is going to convert the polysaccharides into T-dependent antigens. That's a key right there, T-dependent antigens. And an example would be pneumonia polysaccharide vaccine. Some pros, again, no chance of infection as up here. And same thing here, needs a delivery system, but we also need an adjuvant. That's, I think, two of them that we need an adjuvant for. We need one for the inactivated as well as the conjugate. More subunit vaccines will include the toxoid. As the name suggests here, this is going to only have antigenic epitopes. Again, epitopes are the small regions that are actually recognized by the FAB region of any antibody. This is going to be a chemically inactivated toxin. As the name suggests, again. Sorry, I misspelled toxin there. You didn't see that. Alright, pros. This is going to increase the immune response to the component. And again, no cell parts. However, we're going to again need an adjuvant in the toxoid. So that's three of them. So we need one for conjugate, toxoid, and inactivated vaccines. The virus-like particle vaccine is also a subunit, a VLP, and this is going to have the virus surface proteins. Without a genome, there's no viral genome here. Since there isn't a genome, this is going to, again, void cell parts that may cause side effects. And there's going to also be easy access into the cells of the intended host. However, it might be suppressed. Again, it's going to be suppressed just like how let me go back up here. The viral vaccines, both replicating and non-replicating, are going to also be suppressed too. Alright, next, the nucleic acid vaccines. This is where we're going to be seeing the mRNA one from Pfizer and stuff. That's an example of one. Moderna as well. Alright, so I'm going to just start them right here. RNA. So when everyone knows about, I think, very familiar with it. Thank you for saving a lot of people. RNA vaccines are such a wonderful advancement in medicine. Okay, so the mRNA is injected into the muscle and translated into the pathogen protein. So this is, again, utilizing that central dogma to our advantage. Examples, of course, are Moderna and Pfizer. Thank you to RNA being used well in this situation. We're using that central dogma. Thank goodness we were able to discover the central dogma. Alright, pros. No threat of viral infection. Because, again, it's not the virus. It's just the pathogen protein. Looking at the spike protein here. We don't also have integration, so you're not going to become metallic. You're not going to turn into a Borg, Beavis, Butthead, Rick and Morty if you take this, because there's no threat of viral infection, nor does it integrate into the host DNA. So big points that are important to notate here. Some of the cons involve the storage and the delivery. So frozen storage and delivery issues. Again, we talked about the ethics and the accessibility of vaccines. We saw that chart where a lot of places in third world countries and isolated communities, even in first world ones where you have unfortunate divides in the rich and the poor. Not everyone, unfortunately, will be able to get these vaccines, so we need to make sure we work towards accessibility and reaching out to those communities, giving them the resources that they need to also protect themselves. We also, of course, have DNA virus vaccines, and this is going to involve a plasmid that contains the pathogen DNA. And this is going to encode for specific antigens. And this is going to be introduced into cellular tissue. There's a candidate for the Zika virus of this form. Let me go, yeah, that's the next thing. And then it's the same advantages and disadvantages as the RNA vaccine, where there's no infection, no integration, and we're going to have difficulties with freezing and some of the delivery issues, shipping it out. Okay, so some current progress in vaccinations and the world of developing vaccines and all these interesting, like, crazy immunization methods. Like, oh my goodness, we are living in such a golden age right now. If you're interested in all these immunological and vaccine related topics, oh shoot, okay, we have a ton of interesting stuff here. Alright, so recent advances are yielding safer and long-lasting vaccines, more effective ones, for example, conjugate vaccines that enlist or recruit the T cells. There are new adjuvants too. And some of these adjuvants include the cytokines. Remember, those are the voices of the cell seen in innate immunity that are going to attract all of those phagocytic cells and all of those things that are going to just get rid of debris and unwanted invaders in our body. These cytokines are going to really kick in that system, and we're going to be starting to mix the cytokines with the vaccines in order to elicit that stronger response, to make sure we really go in there and, we really do the business. We really go in there and clean all that stuff up when we vaccine. Okay, so novel types are actively being studied, and novel vaccines include peptide vaccines. And this is going to be, again, the antigen from pathogens. We're not using the pathogen itself because did you see when it's the, let me go and find it, when we have the attenuated or the inactivated, the attenuated one could revert. We don't want that. The inactivated one, we might need an adjuvant, so it's a more complex recipe. But if we're using a peptide that's just looking at the key antigenic peptides from the pathogen specific to it, which could, again, increase that specificity. That's amazing. All right, edible vaccines. Not edibles, but edible vaccines. Unfortunately, these might be broken down in digestion. Sorry about that. These might be broken down by our body through digestive processes. However, they are going to have the transfer of genes for those key antigens into the plants, and then we're going to harvest those. And then this could eliminate the difficulties of shipping and storage. Again, this could help reach out to those communities without the worry about transportation or storage or funding. If they're going to be using crops and using that to immunize people, that might be helpful in some of these situations. We also have the DNA and RNA virus vaccines as well. These are going to go into the muscle, and we're going to have short expression. Okay, now we could look at the Moderna vaccine. This is going to, I think it's just another example. We didn't actually get this far in class, but I'm just going to read through it. The vaccine elicits both antibodies and the T cells. The expression happens in the macrophages, is at the injection site. The vaccine goes to the lymph nodes and then will be taken up by the dendritic cells. And then the protein expression is seen in the dendritic cells, and then the subsets of immune cells interact with the vaccine, and then they express it. Childhood immunizations, again, we talked about creating that herd immunity and getting ahead of these horrible, horrible diseases. We're going to have a lot of risk again. However, there's going to, again, be that early exposure, and we could really limit life-threatening concerns later on in life. A child with measles has a 1 in 2,000 chance of serious brain inflammation versus a 1 in 1 million chance from the vaccine. So again, the benefits outweigh the risks from all these studies. There's going to also be acellular subunit vaccines, and we also are going to have boosters in order to increase the effectiveness of vaccines. How can you help people to become vaccinated? So first, you'll need to listen and hear out their hesitancies. They usually have genuine concerns. Then, you'll want to ask questions. Of course, do not be judgmental. You want to be honest and open in your discussions. And then finally, you're going to respond appropriately. You could use benefits or find common ground. Nothing's more patriotic than that. Common ground. What a beautiful thing. Alright. Alright, that's going to be everything on vaccines that the professor went over during class. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you're having a wonderful evening and weekend. Please do something nice for someone, and good night, everyone. We love you. Take care.